Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Peah Chapter 8, Halacha 5, and we're going to continue about Maaser Ani. This part, by the way, is going to be about Maaser Ani when it's at the threshing floor. A lot of times on the farm, they would actually turn part of the farm into the threshing floor, but sometimes they would transport it. In either case, this is the Maaser Ani that's going to be due when the poor people come to actually collect it from the threshing floor rather than from when they're doing the harvest itself. That's also a possibility that they could take it at the threshing floor. Now, I want to point out something that is really genius about how all of this fits together for you. So you notice in Halacha 2 and 3, it's talking about that if the person can come within 1 day, in other words, that Rebbe rules that, okay, if it's a 1 day journey, then he can collect it. And if it's more than that, he's not going to be trusted on it. And it's like, you can't trust him that that's really going to be from tithes. So that really, you have this case of the story where you have the brothers come and they collect a huge quantity. How can that be? Because they live next to a lot of farms. But basically what it's saying is saying, like, let's say the furthest farm you could go to where it's still believable that you really got these tithes is going to be where, let's say you spent half a day going and half a day returning. You came, somebody literally gave it to you, so you spent literally 1 minute collecting it because somebody gave it to you. You asked for your Maaser Ani, and he gave it to you, and then you turned back, and so you went back the other half day, so that when you get home, that's 1 day. Okay, that's believable. All right. Now we learned in the last halacha, halacha 4, that hey, you have to have it where it's at least 2 meals. Why? Because you're spending half the day going, half the day coming. And then if you had gone the whole day and you didn't even get your amount, that would be horrible because you literally spent the halachic time to go where it's still believable as tithes, and then you didn't even get that amount. So it's interesting how this all fits together. Now, the Mishnah, the beginning part of the Mishnah is going to have a 3-way dispute between the Rosh, the Rosh, and the Rambam. They're all going to read this differently. But I'm going to bring out each point because each point helps us to understand this halacha in a much deeper way, and that's really the point of trying to get this, because how often are we studying Maaser Ani? Mishnah says this measure is said with respect to Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. So which measure? We're talking about that they have to have enough to get 2 meals, and that we know is Doraita. And we know that this clips together with the halacha beautifully so that they're not losing time and getting less than if they had spent the day to collect in any capacity. Even if they went half a day to a field and half a day to return, they still got enough to cover for the day. So, okay, maybe it was not a profitable gathering, but they didn't lose. They didn't lose anything. They still were able to sustain themselves. So, what does this mean? This measure is said with respect to Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. So, again, 3 points. Here's the Rosh's point. Let's start with the Rosh's point. He's saying that whether the poor recipient is a Yisrael or whether he's a Kohen or a Levi, he is entitled to a portion of Maaser Ani sufficient for 2 meals. So, this is going to be super necessary because, not just necessary, but super necessary, says the Rosh, because what it's teaching you is that you could say, well, the Kohen and the Levi, they get Truma or Maaser Rishon, so why should he get an extra benefit of 2 meals from Maaser Ani? And you could say, I'm not going to give you Maaser Ani, or I'll give you less than 2 meals because you're already getting Truma. You're already getting your Maaser. You're already getting your tithe for the Levi. So why should I give you extra? I could save it for someone else. So Mishnah comes along, says the Rosh, and says no. The Mishnah is teaching that regardless of the other entitlements that somebody else is entitled to, whether the Levi or the Cohen, any poor person is entitled to the full amount of Maaser Ani. So you can see here that that explanation shows this is super necessary. That, yeah, fine. Yeah, the Cohen gets other tithes. That's Doraita, but you can't skimp out and do less than the amount for the Maaser Ani. That even though he's going to get this other tithe and he's due to the other tithe, you can't subtract from it. You can't say, well, I'm going to let this one offset that one. No, this is the Maaser Ani tithe, and you have to give to the Maaser Ani tithe. And the Truma tithe is the Truma tithe, and they're two different ones. You can't blur them. You're not allowed to say, I'm going to offset this one for that one. And that's the deep and amazing insight by the Rosh on this Mishnah. Then there's another commentary. Let's go by the Rosh. They're only one letter difference, Rosh and Rosh, right? So this one is a different idea, and it is also really necessary. Okay. Here's his opinion in the Mishnah. Okay, it's referring to three distinct dues, saying that it's referring to the disbursement of Truma to the Kohen, to the Maaser Rishon to the Levi, and it's showing as well you have the Maaser Ani to every poor Jew. And the Mishnah is teaching just as Maaser Ani must be distributed in portions of at least 2 meals worth, so too when distributing Truma to a Kohen or Maaser Rishon to a Levi, he must also give 2 meals worth. What this is also showing, so the Rosh's point has two facets to it. He's using it to say, this and that over here. Just as with the Yisrael, he's entitled to the Maaser Ani and but not the tithe for the Levi or tithe for the Kohen. We know that over here, hey, this amount here is going to be 2 meals. So too, we're going to learn over there that the minimum amount that you can give for the Maaser Rishon or for the Truma is also going to be 2 meals. That's one way to read it according to how the Rosh is pointing it out. That's a great insight. But the other way he's pointing out, implicit in there, is that it's saying that, wait a second, we know that the Maaser Rishon goes to the Levi, and we know that the Truma goes to the Kohen. So why is the Yisrael there? And the Yisrael is there to show that, hey, you get Maaser Ani, but it's not just a tithe for the Yisrael. What it's trying to show is that the Maaser Ani can also be for the Kohanim and the Levi. So it also does this like 2-part point by saying we learn over here from the Yisrael and can apply it over here to the Kohen and the Levi. Very, very rich, deep, amazing insight. And here's the Rambam's commentary. The Rambam has a totally different way to read it. And here's what he's saying. He's saying that the Mishnah refers to the donors, not the recipients. In other words, what he's saying that before with the Rosh and the Rosh, and the first way you might read this is you say, okay, well, these are the recipients of Maaser Ani. He's saying, no. These are actually the people who are giving. Very, very big twist. I bet you didn't see that one coming. So he's saying that whether the landowner is a Kohen, a Levi, or a Yisrael, he has to distribute his Maaser Ani to other poor people. Very, very interesting insight. So the Mishnah now is going to get into how the farmer wants to set aside Maaser Ani if he has poor relatives. So that's going to be a point because guess what? The Torah, the idea in the Torah, the Das Torah, the Chochmah of the Torah is that you're supposed to support the people, the community that's closest to you. So that if you're deciding to give tzedakah between a community that's 5 minutes from you or a community that's in Hong Kong and that's the other side of the world for you, that you should be choosing the community that's next to you. That's really how it's supposed to work. So who's more close to you than your poor relatives? But wait a second, you say. But how can you give it all away to your poor relatives? What about the other poor people? And isn't it going to end up being where, it's going to be like the Kohen for Truma not giving it to other Kohanim? He'll be giving his Truma to his poor relatives or his just relatives? Isn't that kind of a conflict of interest? So here's how the Mishnah is going to prescribe for us how we conduct ourselves. He says that The Mishnah says, one who is saving Maaser Ani for poor relatives may give half to the other poor people and take half for his relatives. However, if he has only a small amount, he puts it before them and they divide it among themselves. So this part about dividing among themselves is going to be explained later, but this is talking about if you don't really have enough, that you have to leave it out, and it's like other tithes that people come and collect it. And you're not allowed to favor. You're not allowed to put down the tithes in a way that's gonna bias one poor person over another. And because we know that from the other tithes earlier in Masechet Peah, then you would say the same about the poor relatives. In other words, if it's a smaller amount, that you have to leave it out for them to take, and it's open to competition. But if you have a very, very large quantity, you're allowed to take up to half of it and give it to poor relatives. They have to halachically meet the standard of a poor relative. Otherwise, you're not allowed to do it. You have to give it to regular owners. But with the Maaser Ani distribution, it's obvious that there's some part of it where you can give it to which poor person you desire. So that's going to be also the same for tithes for the Cohen. You can also give it to which Cohen you desire, and whether you're Yisrael or you're a Cohen separating Truma and Maaser for other Kohanim, you have the right to choose other people. So they're putting in a limit of half, unless there's such a small quantity that there's a lot of people there, and again, you have to make sure that they have this minimum amount. So if you can't quite cover, or it's right at that threshold of a minimum amount versus the number of poor people that are in front of you, you got to put it out for them to divide among themselves. Now, keep in mind, it's going to be where they're going to divide it among themselves. They're not going to be sitting there where one person grabs all of it and the other people don't get. It's going to be a case where it's going to be divided. But if you have so much that you look at the people in front of you and you can easily give them a minimum amount, and then you have leftovers for your poor relatives, then you're allowed to take up to half. That's what this Mishnah is saying. Gemara now is gonna get into it. It's gonna talk about two explanations of the last part of the Mishnah. Now, it's interesting that the Gemara is not gonna be talking about the first part. It just doesn't bring up any commentary on it at all. So I think that's a good reason why you have three really smart explanations about what's happening in this Mishnah. The Rosh, the Rosh, and the Rambam have brilliant and all valid. They're all correct. Each one is correct. This one's correct, and this one's correct, and this one's correct. But they're correct about three different parts of it. In entirety, you would take all three opinions, and that would all three of them would be the halacha. That is basically the principle. But what's interesting, the Gemara doesn't comment on it, so it just assumes that either you have a tradition for it or it's self-evident. Okay, so Gemara now wants to talk about the last half of the Mishnah, and Rabbi Yonah interpreted the ruling of the Mishnah that we may give half away and save half for the poor relatives as referring to when the farmer has more than the amount needed for poor people who have come to collect Maaser Ani. Again, we're talking about a farmer who has the field in front of him, the threshing floor grain in front of him, and he's looking at, and you have 10 people to come, you have to give out 20 meals, but what happens if you have enough for 50 meals? Well, he's saying that you can say, okay, well, I'm going to take 25 for my relatives, but not more than that. And then you can divide, between the 10 people and give a little bit extra so that it comes up with it. But let's say you have this threshing floor and you have enough Maaser Ani to give exactly 20 meals for the 10 people. Then what happens is you don't have any leftovers for your relatives, and so you can't come to them and say, okay, well, I'm going to give 10 to my relatives and 10 serve 5 of these people. You can't. You got to give to the 10 people that are in front of you. So that's what's coming first. The people that are actually there, that's going to be before the actual relatives. So notice that. So again, the idea in the Torah is that it's going to be the people that are closest to you that give. And what really the Gemara is doing and the Halacha is doing is it's saying, no, the guy who's come to you right now, that guy is even closer to you than your relative who's not next to you and in front of you right now. So that's a very clever point. That obligation comes to feed the person who's sitting there in need right now. Why? Why would that be? Because the guy could have traveled half a day to come to you and is going to travel half a day to go back. And if you don't give it to him, he has a loss for the day. You're going to be really, really oppressing the poor, and you're not allowed to oppress the poor. That's a deraita thing. And that's what you're trying to cut off by making sure that you serve the poor in front of you now. Very elegant. The Mishnah is teaching as follows, okay? And here's what the Gemara reads. It says, in that case, if he was interested in saving Maaser Ani for his poor relatives, he may take half for his poor relatives and give half to the poor. In other words, if he already said, okay, well, I'm gonna take part of it out for my poor relatives, that's fine. But let's say now you have more people that showed up than you expected. Well, you have to diminish what you're saving for your poor relative and give it to the person who's in front of you. That's what that means. Now the Gemara continues. It says, but if his available Maaser Ani totals only the amount needed for the poor people who have come, he may not set aside Maaser Ani for his relatives. Rather, he places it before the poor, and they divide it among themselves. In other words, what this is trying to say is it's trying to say that the landowner has to allow each poor person to take the minimum amount, and he may not set aside the Maaser Ani. And by the way, by setting it out and dividing, this is also meaning that the poor person can't come and take 10 meals for himself and leave other poor people with less than 2 meals worth. So when it's saying to divide it, it's saying that they themselves, among themselves, are not an open competition like trying to grab grapes from a trellised area, but this Maaser Ani is to be distributed so everybody gets 2 meals. So then you have the second explanation of the Mishnah, and here's what it says. It says, Rabbi Hiskia interpreted the Mishnah as referring to when the farmer has only the amount needed for the poor in the field, and the Mishnah teaches that even in that case, he may set aside the Maaser Ani for his poor relatives as follows. So here's what he's saying. In other words, says the Rosh Cirilio, he's with regard to charity, okay, your own poor takes precedence, okay, and therefore you're allowed to save some Maaser Ani for your relatives, but you can't do it if the other poor people are not going to get the minimums mandated by the sages. And by the way, they're taking that doraita. So if you're doing that, you're really breaking something doraita. But it's going to add up. So that what's going to happen is it's going to be like, well, you violated a verse in the Torah about oppressing the poor, and you violated a verse about moving the long-standing boundary because everybody knows that you're supposed to get 2 meals, and then you changed it so you only gave them 1 meal, so you changed the boundary on them, and then what you did is you perhaps stole from them because they're entitled to it, and then and then da 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 da, it adds up. So it's like in Masechet Shabbos in chapter 7 where it adds up. If you build a basket, how many averas did you do on Shabbos? And if you ate an ant, how many averas did you do from the Torah? Well, this is going to add up as well. So really, this coming to put in this amount for 2 meals, it really has to be, and that this is going to come before the relatives because these poor people are closer to you than the others. That's really the key point, the key takeaway of this. So Gemara is going to continue from Rabbi Hiskia, and he says, if he wants to save Maaser Ani for his poor relatives and takes half for his relatives and gives half to the other poor people, and because he took half for his relatives and gave only half to the poor, the remainder became too small for an amount for each poor person to receive the minimum, he places it before them and they divide it among themselves. So let's say he went ahead and divided it already before they came. Then he saw more poor people come. And what Rabbi Hiskia is saying that the Mishnah is teaching is that you have to take out from the poor relatives the amount to bring it up to 2 meals, and then split it up so that you divide it among the people, so everybody gets the 2 meals. So even if you divided it half and half, that's not a finished thing, says Rabbi Hiskia. So that the very act of the poor coming in front of you now obligates you to change that half. That half and half is not set in stone, is the point by Rabbi Hiskia. And what that's trying to show is that it's changeable based on the need. So that, again, if more people come out, very good. If fewer people come out, probably would be the other way too. You could say, okay, well, I have enough for 40 meals, and I only had 5 people come out. Therefore, I set aside 20 meals and 20 meals. So I'm going to give 2 meals to everybody. So that's 10 meals. So I'm going to increase the amount for the poor relative, right? But then you say, no, you really can't do that, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to limit how much you can give to the poor relative. So it's not going to work that way. You're not going to be able to add back a greater amount, because what would happen then is you would have given, in this case, you would have given 25% to the poor people in front of you and 75% to the rich relatives or the poor relatives. You're not allowed to do that. It's half and half. But it's going to favor the people who are actually in front of you, so that you can't increase the amount over half for your poor relatives, but you can decrease that amount. So it goes one way, and that's one of the key takeaways on this. So that this entitlement is a guaranteed thing, and that if these 5 people came, you would still have to split it half and half. In other words, the poor people that came for the Maaser Ani would get a greater share than 2 meals per day, but it would still come up to half of your Maaser Ani. You're not allowed to add to your family's limit. So the Gemara addresses which poor people are entitled to the minimum amount delineated by the Mishnah. And the Baraisa taught, regarding those who make the rounds door to door, we do not involve ourselves to assist them for all matters, for the income received from their door to door solicitation suffices to satisfy all needs. Now, there's a lot of commentary on this, and a lot of the Meforshim say that this verse and the next part of this ruling that gets qualified really belongs in the next is a Gemara in the next Mishnah, but nonetheless, this is here. So, without trying to amend the text and re-edit the text, how would we interpret this so that we keep it in this Baraisa in this Gemara and keep it relevant? So, again, a lot of the commentators say that this is misplaced, and they're saying that the door-to-door solicitations is talking about somebody who's collecting from like the charity box. But if we're going to try to interpret this in terms of this, the way you would say it, you would look at it and say that this is talking about the Maaser Ani distributions in this Mishnah, not the next one, which is talking about the charity box. And basically, what this would be teaching here is that somebody who's coming door to door is not does not have the right to get Maaser Ani. That's, if you left this in here, that's what this would be saying. Okay, so that you would limit this to Maaser Ani, and basically what that would mean is that the poor person has an obligation to come and collect in the proper way, and if they're changing the collection in a way that's not normal, like let's say now they're coming door to door to collect Maaser Ani instead of going to the threshing floor, you don't have any obligation to give it to them, not to give them anything. So, but then the Gemara qualifies the ruling and says, Rabbi Yonah said, as long as you not give him less than his usual amount, so that let's say you were doing it like this was part of the next Gemara, next halacha. You would say that, well, the charity fund would give a donation, and would give a small amount, what he's used to, so that people didn't think he was like, a crook and a cheat and a thief. Because what would happen then is people would see that, when he came to collect charity in this unusual way, then and they saw that the charity box didn't give to him, they would say, well, maybe the charity box knows that this guy is a deceiver and a crook. And then what will happen is the other people won't give to him. And what will happen is actually the guy might not be a crook and just might, be strange in the way he collects. And then you're going to endanger his life because nobody is going to give him. So the qualification is that you don't have to give the Maaser Ani if he's coming to your door to collect Maaser Ani, but if he's coming to collect the other tithes or from the charity box, you can give him a small amount. Now this, by the way, connects very strongly to what happens when you have people knocking on your doors in your house in this year, and that they're not asking for bundles of grain as Maaser Ani. What's the rule? So Rabbi Horowitz, the Rosh Yeshiva, spoke about this at length in one of his shiurim. Here's what he said. He said that if somebody comes to your door, you can give him a small amount. You give him a little bit. But if they're coming with a very big story, and they're coming with a thing, okay, I got to marry off, and I have no money, I have a surgery, I have this. I remember one time some guy knocked on my door and was saying, I can't have kids and I need money for the treatment for kids. Okay, very good, but how do I know? And Rabbi Horowitz said that if you're going to give more, and the obligation's on you, right? So if you're going to give more than just a token amount, that you're required to actually research if this is true or not, because there's other Gemaras that say that if you're not worthy, and you're going to be milked out of your money, because your charity has so much value in Shemayim to fix sins, that what will happen is if there's a judgment against you, that they're going to send crooks who are going to trick as if that this is XYZ cause, and get the money so that it's not in your possession to give to real charity, so you have less in Shemayim to protect you as part of your judgment. Okay, so that what's happening is that when you're giving charity, you don't get credit for giving to a crook. You get no credit in Shemayim. But you don't have time. You can't investigate everybody and every story, right? So the way it works is you give a token amount. You don't send somebody away with nothing. And Rabbi Horowitz, what he said if you send somebody away with nothing, you might end up in Shemayim where you're going to make less money. So you want to give at least something, even if it's a token amount. By the way, the halacha is if the person refuses, you don't have to give to him again, because the guy just refused. I remember one time in shul, there's a guy who came and collected, and I gave him like a shekel or something, and the guy was like, "This is not enough money," and gave it back to me. And then I saw him collecting, once a week for XYZ whatever, and I never, I didn't have to give to him again because he refused my money. So that by the way is a halacha, but because I don't have a lot of money, so I'd rather give the shekel to a guy who someone else. I'm not cutting down on my the amount that I'm giving. I'm still giving the same amount of money. I'm just not giving to that one. I'm choosing someone else. But in the case of you giving tzedakah door to door, if somebody's coming and giving, or somebody's asking for money, you are required to investigate it. I'll tell you another story Rabbi Horowitz said about it, was that he was going to collect for the Yeshiva Daf Yerushalmi in New York, and he landed there, and there was a guy who he came to big shul where they raise a lot of money for yeshivas in Jerusalem, and they said, Dvar Yerushalayim, your guy was here collecting 2 weeks ago. And Rabbi Horowitz said, what are you talking about? He says, yeah, the guy came to collect. So what turned out happening was this was actually a false collector, a scam artist, and he ended up collecting money for the yeshiva, never actually gave it to the yeshiva and kept it for himself. Rabbi Horowitz, I believe him when he says that the yeshiva never got the money. So you do have false collectors. I know for sure that there's someone in Sfat that collects by one of the cavers that's actually just an Arab. And it's an Arab that's been there collecting for years, very famous, well known. And a lot of the tourists come from, America and they don't know. And they give to this person pretending to be a Jew in front of the caver. And, okay, you want to give, a small amount. Okay, fine. But, it turns out that the guy's not even Jew. So, you hand him a 20 or you hand him a 50 and, you didn't, you don't get credit in Shemayim for giving tzedakah for 50 because that's not tzedakah. And, a lot of these people that are, over at the wall, they make so much money because you see them get into their fancy cars and drive away in their fancy cars. And I know for a fact, because my mother-in-law is friends with a couple of them, that they have married off their children and bought them apartments, and they make so much money, and they're so addicted to collecting by the wall that that's really their job. That's not even tzedakah because okay, they can go get a job doing something else. They can go be a secretary in a yeshiva. They don't need to sit there and earn money that way. It's their job. It's just a fake story, and you don't get credit in Shemayim for those kinds of tzedakah. It's not tzedakah, and I can tell you that I had another case where I gave money when I was living outside of Israel. I gave money to a guy who was collecting for a yeshiva, and then when I moved to Eretz Yisrael, I wanted to go visit the yeshiva, and the guy changed his number, and all the information on the yeshiva was not correct, and there was no such yeshiva. The guy just pocketed the money, and you tried to contact the guy, and the guy would hang up. There was no such thing. So you are required to check before you give a big amount of money, and Hashem. It says there's a Gemara. It says that Hashem will send thieves basically to take away your tzedakah money, so you're not getting credit for it. So you give a token amount, but not more. And then when you want to give real tzedakah, you go and you investigate it like a mensch, and that way you get your credit in Shemayim. Now the Gemara is going to talk about this apparent contradiction between this Mishnah and the Mishnah coming up, which is going to be about the charity box. And over here, this is talking about the threshing floor. So the Gemara says like this. It says, here in our Mishnah, you say regarding Maaser Ani, one may not give the poor at the threshing floor less than half a calf of wheat, for that is the amount needed for 2 meals. But here in the next Mishnah, you say that a poor traveler, one may not give a poor person going from place to place less than a loaf that costs a pudion, when 4 seah of wheat costs 1 selah, an amount needed for 2 meals. So basically what this is asking is saying that since a selah buys 4 seah of wheat, a pudion, pundion will buy a half a kav of wheat. It would follow that the loaf given to the poor person contains a half kav of wheat, but when we give the poor person wheat, the poor person will incur the expense of grinding the wheat and then sifting and baking the flour. And if we deduct these expenses from the amount of bread produced, the amount will be decreased to less than the 2-meal minimum. So the question here, what it's trying to compare, it's trying to say, look, if you have, says Amara Fulda, if you have a seah of wheat, which is 6 calves, so that 4 seahs, 24 calves, okay? So basically you have enough for a challah, okay? Because a challah is 24, basically 24 calves, 24 1/3 calves. A selah is a coin equal in value to 24 silver ma'os, and a ma'ah is equal to 2 pundions. So that there's 48 pundions in a selah. So when 4 seah, 420, which is 24 calves of wheat, which is enough to make a challah, will sell for a selah, which is 48 pundions, the 2 pundions will buy a calf of wheat, and 1 pundion will buy a half calf. What this is trying to say is this is trying to talk about, you had a a big change in the currencies during the time the Yerushalmi was written. And these changes of currency come up many times in the Shas. And what happened was when you had the Romans here, the the value of a maos ended up shrinking a lot because they were taking the silver out of the coins. It was another way to rob Eretz Yisrael. They took the coins that were in circulation and were reminting it to take out the silver, so that the value started to really plummet. And so what this law is trying to do, it's trying to be a holdover that, don't think today about a fixed currency where more or less you wake up and, dollars from one year to another are more or less the same. Okay, maybe you could purchase 2% less. This was a serious attempt at devaluation in Eretz Yisrael by the Roman government, and the value of the currency ended up falling by more than half because of this practice of minting, reminting, and taking the valuable gold and silver out of the currency and replacing it. So what was happening was you had a massive devaluation, and you wanted to make sure that in the case of a devaluation, that the poor person still was able to get at least a challah, and that this is a way to describe an emergency devaluation where you're still trying to protect the poor person to get a challah, so that if you just said the amount of, when you can buy, 4 seah of wheat, well, if the amount that you can buy for 4 seah of wheat starts changing, where 1 selah really starts to become worth, three selah, then you can't use that measurement. So what this is trying to do is this is trying to protect that amount, so that after the poor person goes ahead and grinds it and sifts it and bakes it, he ends up with a 2 meal minimum. This is a literary way to try to describe a period of time where you're having a big loss in value, to try to preserve that 2 meal a day. That's really what this is trying to describe. The Gemara is going to try to resolve this difficulty. Rabbi Huna said, a loaf costing a pundion actually contains less than a full cav of wheat. For when reckoning the amount of wheat in a loaf worth 1 pundion, you must deduct from them the grain purchased with a pundion, a third of the expense to produce the bread from kettles. Hence, the upcoming Mishnah, says Rabbi Huna, is actually describing a loaf of bread consisting of less than half a cav of wheat, and a half cav of wheat kernels is given as Maaser Ani, actually yields the same amount of bread as a loaf given to the traveler. So what they're trying to say is that, says the Pnei Moshe, that when a baker sells his bread, he deducts 1/3 to cover the expenses and labor, and 1/3 must be deducted from the half cav, leaving him with a loaf containing at least 1/3 of a cav, so that after all is said and done, you have to give him enough that after he sifts it, grinds it, and bakes it, and goes through the effort, that what he's left with in selling will still be able to buy him 2 meals. Okay? So now, go try to figure that out when you're having a devaluation in your currency. Very tricky. And that's why the Gemara is trying to use these mathematical figures and changes in order to describe this devaluation currency event. The Gemara notes, Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Bun, deducted for the bakers, like the formula for Rav Huna, 1/3, provided that the wheat sells for this amount. In other words, the amount delineated in the next Mishnah. Now, again, we're talking about deducting 1/3 for the wheat kernels, because you have, as you do it, you have to take out the chaff, you have to take out, you have to thresh it. That produces, a loss, because you're losing bran and, fiber and things like that. And then you have to grind it. You have a little bit of a loss there. And then you have to sift it. You have a little bit of a loss there. And then you have to bake it and like that. And so what's happens to happen is, after he goes through all of these, consecutive losses, that he's ended up with after he's sold that, an amount to be able to buy 2 meals. So in a day, says Amara Fulda, when wheat costs 4 seah per sela, okay, the bread would have to be the size calculated above, but when wheat is more expensive, Rabbi Yossi would adjust the calculation accordingly, and the Vilna Goan writes that for larger amounts of bread, the bakers could not deduct the same percentage because the larger quantities of bread can be baked at a lower cost per calf. So you have always in the halacha in the Yerushalmi, you have two variables in the baking of bread. Okay, you have for commercial bakeries and you have for household. And for bakeries that are commercial at a big scale, they have to give less because the amount that they're giving is such a big quantity. If they were to give the same amount as a householder, it would be a ginormous amount. Okay, so that it suffices for the bakery to do it at this bigger amount. And what the Vilna Gaon is pointing out is that let's say you have a deflation. Well, even if you have a deflation, the bakery still has more purchasing power when they're buying it, so that if they're not obligated to use the same ratio as when you're using for a householder. But what they're also pointing out is that when you had this devaluation, they would keep these ratios the same so that as the currency fluctuated and went down, that they could maintain this amount where they're still getting the two meals. Now, the Gemara is going to pose a question regarding the laws of charity. Rabbi Ba Bar Mamel inquired before Rabbi La, if they saw the poor person leave the city and enter it again, do they give him provisions for the night lodging? So the halacha is like this, right? If somebody goes and leaves the city, if somebody comes from the city, he's a traveler or a wanderer, and he comes into the city, you're supposed to give him enough where he can get for lodging and he can get meals, a couple of meals, okay? So the question now is, well, what happens if this wanderer came in, collected his amount for the night lodging and his couple of meals, then he left and he came back? Now do you have to give him again? So why would that be coming up? Well, the Gemara is going to be posing a question, says the Mara Fulda, and that we're going to be concerned that his return to town might really be a trick to obtain extra possessions and provisions, and he actually has no intention of spending the night there, and we're not sure. Maybe he will spend the night there, maybe he's not. So are you required to give to him? And Rabbi La replies, and he says to Rabbi Ba, the giver should give, but the taker must take heed for himself. Why would that be? Mara Fulda says like this. He says, the giver should give notwithstanding his concern that this poor person has plans to leave town and he's trying to trick the system. But the poor person, however, must realize that if he does leave town, he has no rights to take the possessions and provisions. So in other words, if he got the extra, he's not, and he doesn't really have the intent to stay, the amount extra that they gave him, they already gave him one time, now he's been given a second time, so he's not allowed to take the provisions if he doesn't have intention to stay. Okay, that's what it's saying. Why would that be? Because if you're coming and you're trying to trick it, and you're trying to get these extra provisions, the people there are supposed to give you. But you, as a poor person, are supposed to be responsible not to steal. And if you are stealing, you're going to have a big problem because you're stealing. So that's going to conclude for today. By the way, you might say, well, how do you know that there's an Arab up in Sfat that's collecting? And I'll tell you how I know this, because there was a case where people came from New York and from New Jersey, and they gave them checks because they didn't have money to give. And they ended up cashing the checks in the Arab bank. And they complained, the people in New York complained to the police, and they did an investigation. And it turns out that the person who was cashing in the Arab bank was an Arab who was pretending. So that's how I know that this is a true story. And I know one of the people that this happened to. So you have to be very careful with your parnasah. And charity has a special credit in Shemayim for helping you when there's a plague or when there's misfortune. And charity is like your blood. Giving money is like your blood. And if you have a judgment against you in heaven, Hashem will send fake charity collectors to take that away from you, so you can't save yourself. And that's why you're incumbent to do research if you're going to give a large amount of money or something significant, something more than, say, $10, $20. If you're going to give something, something somewhat substantial, you need to investigate and check for yourself. Because I myself have been scammed out of money for a yeshiva. And Rabbi Horowitz has seen in him, by himself, that a scammer went to a big, sophisticated place in New York to raise money for the yeshiva, and they scammed everybody there. So you have to really know where the money is going, what it's being used for, and it's your responsibility to check.